Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, here with an episode as titled. I hope you're curious about this. I'm going to look into how Grail and Holy Grail in particular has come to have meaning in our hobby, and increasingly so in the last years. It's part of the hobby vernacular. Thanks sponsors: Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. As I said, the quest or the pursuit of a Grail or a Holy Grail card has taken on significant meaning. But where did it come from? And I'm going to have hopefully some fun with y'all today in mixing some pop culture with some religious references with some sports card insights. I'm particularly interested in the Holy Grail from the culture, from the pop culture, the movies, etc., is singular, but apparently the hobby meaning has taken off on any kind of an individualized. You could even have more than one Grail card, and your Grail is not necessarily my Grail, and vice versa. And that's the opposite of the way the kind of legend or the concept of the Holy Grail is portrayed in literature and movies, and it's really fiction. And it's not biblical, which is kind of interesting, but it does have a Christian reference. So in the movies, the most recent movie, Da Vinci Code, which was just this book by Dan Brown that was a bestseller, and it's super complicated. It's Tom Hanks. It was an interesting movie, but I don't know that it's fictional history or historical fiction, but it's emphasis on the fiction. But it's a great story, as I said, very, very complicated. And a big part of it is the search for the Holy Grail and all the other things that go with that. Of course, on the other end of the entertainment spectrum is Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which is now, what would that be, 45 years old. So and then they made the musical Spamalot out of it, a riff on Camelot. And then, of course, there's Harrison Ford and Sean Connery, who played his dad in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That, again, was about the pursuit, trying to find the Holy Grail. And if you remember that movie, spoiler alert, the Holy Grail was not this extremely glitzy, ornate cup or chalice. It was the simplest one. And, of course, Indiana Jones figured that out, and his dad, Sean Connery, which was interesting. And they had the legend was that you drink from this true cup. It would heal you, and you'd have some sense of immortality. Of course, you learn in the movie, again, spoiler alert, that you have to stay in the temple, or that immortality does not. So again, very much legendary, not just it's just a story. And again, it's not in the Bible, so there's nothing biblical about it other than Christians have Holy Communion, which is drinking from a cup back in the original conception, and that is considered a spiritual mystery. So a Holy Grail is kind of an elusive object or a goal in the culture now that's sought after for significance and meaning, and there's always a story behind it, but it's not necessarily for beauty or monetary value. And that's where it's a little bit different in the cards. Although I have talked to people that had a Holy Grail card that was not super valuable, but very elusive. I have lots of friends actually, but one of my friends had Dorothy's ruby red slippers from The Wizard of Oz. And I noticed, this was a number of years ago, I noticed that the slippers sold, and I went to him and said, "Hey, congratulations, you got a good price." He said, I didn't sell them. It turns out, for that Holy Grail, there's actually 4 pairs of the Wizard of Oz ruby red slippers. So be careful that your Grail may not be a one of a kind. The religious reference here, just the word holy means set apart. So if it's a Holy Grail, it means a Grail that's set apart in value, meaning, and importance. And again, it's not biblical, other than the quotation in the Gospels of after supper he took the cup, meaning Jesus took the cup, and it's from the Last Supper. But it didn't say he took the Holy Grail or some diamond encrusted chalice. But fast forward about 1,000 years, and somewhere in the Crusades there is this myth or legend of the Holy Grail, and that's part of the Crusades, which was, again, the Christians against the Muslims. Again, politically incorrect, perhaps, but again, and all the Christians in those days were Catholics, because the Catholics was the only church. In fact, the word Catholic means universal. So for 1,500 years, that's the Christian church, and they had a lot of traditions that came with that. Of course, in 1500, Martin Luther comes along, who's a reformer, and looked at and said, hey, there's other ways to do this. And, if you haven't heard of Martin Luther, you certainly heard of Martin Luther King Jr. Trick question. Who was Martin Luther King Jr. named after? Well, he was named after his dad, who was not the junior, but somewhere along the line, Martin Luther from 1500 was dramatically changed the face of Christianity and brought in the Protestant Reformation. So they were the original protesters against the establishment, which was the Catholic Church. And those protests, just as in today's protests, are not always completely peaceful. A couple of criticisms that Protestants have of Catholics that have to do with the Holy Grail. One is that there's a perception among Protestants that Catholics add a lot of traditions to the wisdom in the Bible. And that's kind of like the establishment just said, this is the way we've always done it. And that's just the way it is. And the Protestants come along and say, well, I don't think you have to do it that way. And so in the hobby reference, the case breakers were Protestants in the sense that they came along and said, hey, there's more than one way to sell cases and boxes of product. And they brought an innovation that now I think is widely accepted. And the second point is that the Catholic Church had a lot of veneration of icons and relics. Again, this is wonderful in the sense of us collectors. They would have appreciated the Holy Grail. And so the Catholics predate us collectors as early super collectors. They weren't the first collectors. I think the Egyptians had them beat by a few thousand years, but the Egyptians had that awkward problem of burying the best stuff with them. And that's clearly not recommended. I don't want to be buried with my cards. I want my cards to be, sold off and to benefit my heirs and whatever charities or whatever we want to do. So the Catholics put these icons and relics in places of honor, much like we do. So again, there's the tie-in to a Grail or Holy Grail. The Holy Grail, it's never going to be found because it would not be authenticatable, I don't think. So, but if it were to be, it would be on display in the Vatican. Okay, back to sports card collecting insights. So this Grail quest, actually, it could last a lifetime and it may not even happen. And that's kind of the beauty of it all. And some Grails, again, it's in the eye of the beholder in one sense, but in another sense, some are better than others. And who determines it? Is it non-collectors? If you say, hey, this is my Grail card, are you trying to impress a non-collector or a casual collector or a serious collector? I think it's, again, just based on all the religious and pop culture, it's the Grail is most appreciated by those who really understand it, the rarity, the quest. And that transcends whether or not a card would be BGS 1 or BGS 10. So a T206 Hannes Wagner card is a Grail in any condition, even if it's just authentic. Maybe it's been trimmed. It's still a Holy Grail, probably in any collection. Now, what about 52 Topps Mickey Mantle? I think that also can be a Grail card, but perhaps that needs to be above a certain grade. Perhaps not. Another Grail card that's gotten a lot of ink lately is the Michael Jordan PMG green card. That's clearly a Grail card and one of the main basketball Grail cards, but the card they're referring to was slabbed. It was altered. It didn't even get a number grade. It was just, it's just authentic. So, do I think that modern day, these freshly minted, I'm not talking about from the 90s, I'm talking about this year's cards or last year's cards, are these freshly minted Holy Grails? Is that sacrilegious in some sense? Does a Holy Grail card need to have stood the test of time, or can it be an instant Holy Grail card for Luca or for Zion? I think the culture is determined as the culture has gotten less religious, as I've seen in my lifetime. I don't think it matters. They're not looking at a 500-year-old context. They're seeing the card, and it's very, very desirable, great bragging rights. And so I don't think it matters to these younger generations of collectors. In fact, sometimes the newer the better. And that's, I don't know how else to explain these fantastical six-figure prices of recent cards of Mike Trout. And I already mentioned Michael Jordan, but also LeBron James. When a card that's freshly printed in the last in the last 10 or 15 years, let's say 17 years, is reaching seven figures, that's more than a car. It's at the price where you could choose to have a nice house or the card. And most people, again, it's a Grail card if you'd rather have the card than a house. I think that would be the way to say it. So the Baseball Hall of Fame, when they were down here a couple years ago, and I convened some of the guys for my dinner, and we interacted with them when they were putting together their Shoebox Treasures exhibit. They all along were talking about the Baseball Hall of Fame Holy Grail cards that they wanted to be able to display permanently, and they picked they made a choice. And I just was going to, editorially, one of my Grail cards probably would be a Shoeless Joe Jackson, one of his contemporaneous cards. But clearly that's not in the Hall of Fame's list because he's not in the Hall of Fame because of the the cheating, the Black Sox of 1919. But the Grail cards that I think everybody would agree on, there's 10 at the Hall of Fame. And again, this is just baseball. We could do a whole nother episode on basketball, which is frankly one of the sports where the term is used most often. But football, hockey, I mean, they've all got cards that are very difficult to find and have instant recognition. And again, as I said, in most cases, very high value. But that's not the main determinant. But they need to be hard to find. So number one on the Baseball Hall of Fame, and I strongly encourage you to go and visit. I've been several times. And I've been down in the basement, in the archives. You can't always do that, but if you have a chance to do it and do the more detailed tour, I just strongly recommend you do that. I'm glad they're featuring cards more, and these 10 cards, they're all worthy of being Grails, but I have 5 that I put even in the upper rank. And number 1, start with the Hannes Wagner T206. I don't have that, and that wouldn't be, I've told you, I came up as an underbidder, and so I have my own chagrin for being the price guide guy and not seeing value that has increased steadily and mightily over these decades. Number 2, I put the 52 Topps Mantle. I actually do have that. I have a 52 Topps set, keep at the bank, and that's a really cool card. My problem with the Grails, when they get expensive like that, you don't want to keep them at home. So I don't know what some of my these other advanced collectors are doing, but you've got to be careful when something has that much publicity and gets that. Number 3 on the Hall of Fame list is the Babe Ruth Sporting News. It's kind of his mainstream rookie, I guess. He's on the Red Sox. I do actually have that also at the bank. And that's clearly worthy of being a Grail. It's not rare in one sense if you find some of those cards, but the sets themselves are not easily found. They were found a lot more back in the 70s, which is I picked mine up in 75 or 76. So didn't pay very much compared to what it's worth now. Number 4, I would have the Napoleon Lajoie, the 33-34 Gaudi. My dad never had that. I never had it. Again, another situation where I think I've detailed where I was the underbidder. And this was in the 70s, but so now I'm not going to tell you what I could have paid slightly more and owned one of those, but that's, in the old days, I think the Wagner and the Lajoie were the 2 really glamour cards back in the 70s. And number 5, in deference to John Newman, I would agree. I think the Leaf Jackie Robinson rookie has historical significance. It's not one of the short prints in the set, whereas the Satchel Paige would be, which would be another potential Grail card. But I have the Jackie Robinson in there just for the historical significance and the fact that it's a beautiful card. And I'm proud to have that one too. The other ones were Stengel, Mathewson, Williams, Plank, and the Peck and Snyder team card. And I don't regard those as, they're just not equal to the top 5. Again, the Stengel, super tough. The Mathewson is, a different pose. The Williams was probably subject to a lawsuit or a threatened lawsuit. The Plank, I've already mentioned that Plank was, I had a friend that was fooled by counterfeit. And the Peck and Snyder is a team card. So I would put that in 10th place. But folks, it's good to have a Grail, to have an aspiration. It's why these movies in the popular culture were successful, because it's just a great story to go after something that's really hard to find, and to finally achieve it is terrific. So I'm glad I'm in a hobby where there are difficult things to go after and aspirations that, if you get in at the right time, you may be able to, and like I get some of these things, I've gotten cards at flea markets that were, back again, it's 50 years ago, but, you can find valuable stuff occasionally. So thanks everybody. Be back again tomorrow with another episode, and enjoy your collecting and pursuit of your Holy Grails.
The man in the house of cards. The man in the house of cards. The man in the house of cards is doing all right.